Hail and well met adventurers! Welcome back to another fun installment of Hero Sheets. I am your lovely host, Daria. I use she, her pronouns, and welcome today's guest, the intrepid Vince. Introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I am Vince. I use he, him pronouns, and you might know me as at Dichotomous Prime on Twitter, or as the Dusan Acolyte Keshav as of last week on Tales from Thra. Yeah, I'm a West Indian Canadian. I live with ADHD and depression, and I do various different things, including voice acting. I'm a professional GM for about 3.5 years now, and I am in the midst of designing tabletop RPG content, including being a sensitivity reader and editor for Unconquered, which is currently now on Kickstarter.
Ooh. And you are our first returning guest after our mishap in December, but it is wonderful to have you back.
Glad to come back. The moment that we were done with that, we're like, nah, this is not the end of it. There will be a sequel where, it's going to be one of those like Empire Strikes Back, like Godfather 2, like better than the original version. So
Exactly.
There we go.
All right, let's just hop into it. I literally was just telling you about this question, so it's going to be our first one, submitted by the lovely Samwise, who is producing tonight. What's your favorite wizard school and why? Any suggestions on where folks who are interested in professional... no, we're going to do that first one first. What's your favorite wizard school and why? I didn't read the whole question. Oops. Anyways.
There are a lot of the ones that I enjoy, but at least me personally as a player, I'm someone who, in a lot of games, I do enjoy playing the support. As everyone who's heard me rant about Monster Hunter on Twitter has heard, I love being a hunting horn main and giving buffs to players. So playing the Divination Wizard as well as the Abjuration Wizard are both really fun, because it's just pretty much kind of like surveying the battlefield and then kind of going like, all right, I'm just gonna enable everyone else to try and be the best version of themselves. So it's like, oh, that's an inconvenient spell. Buffed counter spell, like dispel magic. I'm gonna give myself a ward so that I can tank for a little bit longer. Divination Wizard is just straight up incredibly powerful. And I do, even before Liam O'Brien started using it on Critical Role, rather, I liked the Transmutation Wizard because of how much in the way of flavor it has. Like, a lot of the lower level features of that class, or wizard school rather, are not necessarily especially powerful in terms of raw horsepower or damage, but it is my favorite kind of feature when I design a character, which is, let me find a way for you to interact with the world in a different way than is normally allowed. And then kind of I let you run with your imagination in terms of what you want to do with that. And a lot of kind of the transmutation abilities allow you to go like, all right, well, maybe this isn't going to drop a meteor on someone, but it might enable me to have a really creative and interesting way to engage with whatever story I'm trying to tell. So between the support enjoyment of both the abjuration and divination wizards and the flavor of the transmutation, those are probably my top three, I would say.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree on the Divination Wizard because I think it is my favorite school of magic, because just something about I'm so smart that I did figure out the future and I can change it. I just I love the kind of arrogance that goes with that. I don't know too much about Critical Role. I didn't know that they had like an actual wizard. I thought he was maybe a sorcerer.
Oh no, yeah. Liam O'Brien's character Caleb Widogast is a transmutation wizard, and it's interesting because later on it's become less apparent that that's the case, because he started, which is something that I really enjoy, and I would like to encourage my players to chase the desire if they want to do that even more, which is designing their own kind of custom spells, as well as integrating the spells from Matthew Mercer's own design from his School of Dunamancy, which is
Mhm.
kind of like quantum time and probability type stuff.
Ooh.
So it's kind of beyond the quote unquote canon player's handbook stuff.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, those types of things are always fun as a jumping off point, and then it gets really interesting when you will enable a player with both your own tools and your own enthusiasm as a GM to really chase their desire and make the character their own in a way that feels satisfying. So
Yeah, I think that's my favorite thing about like this concept of magic in D&D is that like how it looks and how you cast it and all of this is very dependent on the player and like what their character does, because like each spell would look different depending on like who's casting it. Like my warlocks chill touch might look very different from like, I don't know, like your wizard's like attempt at it. Like there's just so much personality and flavor that you can put into everything that I absolutely adore. Let's take this really cool question from the lovely Nova, also pulled from our Discord server. She asks, "What's the biggest thing you wish would be standard in the tabletop RPG industry / community, but isn't?"
So does that mean like mechanically or just kind of in general, or does
Take
it
your
say?
it's kind of up to your own interpretation. You can answer it both ways if you feel so inclined.
Okay. Well, in terms of the industry as a whole, I mean, a couple of different things. One thing that we see with a lot of kind of smaller developers and creators is that there's a lot of kind of mutual appreciation for what people do, and mutual appreciation of different systems and that sort of thing. The way that things exist with Wizards of the Coast and D&D right now is there's this whole big community of people who very much appreciate the creative contributions of one another, and then you have fucking Hasbro, who's just kind of like, no, the public must know that we are the ones who dominate the tabletop industry. And there's this sort of thing where there are a lot of people currently working at Wizards of the Coast who worked on other games, who probably have a lot of love for those other games, but because of the nature of it being very, very corporate, it's a like, well, we don't want to give that sort of exposure to our competition there. And it's just like, there is literally room at the table for everyone. And not only that, but instead of solely praising D&D, which this is a thing that I've noticed, is that I feel as though D&D rightfully gets a lot of criticism for some of the pillars of play that it maybe is lacking in, or rather it's focused on a specific vision of what it wants to emphasize. But every game does that, and not every game, Monster Hearts doesn't get crapped on because it doesn't do grid combat, because of course Avery Alder never wanted to do that. They had a specific image for what they wanted to do, and they ran with it. I think the reason that, well, there's a couple of different reasons, but one of the big reasons that D&D gets as much criticism as it does is more because of the corporate handling of how D&D exists relative to other intellectual properties. Meaning, like, if there's something that's lacking, someone who works for Wizards of the Coast, at least not publicly, isn't going to go, well, this is kind of the thing that we've tried to do. If you want some really great games that do other things, here are some other things. They're going to go, no, what you can do is you can make something for DM's Guild and forfeit 50% of your earnings, as well as any kind of future rights to use it in a product, and then have everyone tell you how amazing D&D is because it's amazing that people can essentially make bottom dollar to fill in the holes of our game. But that's not like quote unquote the fault of the game system of 5th edition itself. It's the fault of a very corporate and very kind of like cutthroat, we can't let anyone know that there are people who exist other than us kind of philosophy that a lot of the larger kind of, not even really a lot of the other larger publishers, because Green Ronin and Evil Hat and things like that don't do that. It's a very kind of Hasbro and Wizards exclusive thing to do. So in terms of being able to acknowledge and work collaboratively rather than this whole kind of like weird like shove down the competition and just kind of pretend that they don't exist, I would like that. Another thing, especially relevant for Black History Month, is diversity and inclusivity and specifically equity, because you will find, even though places like Wizards of the Coast are getting better in terms of having more women and more LGBTQ individuals and more non-white individuals on staff, if you look at the large influential positions, they are still filled by white people. And the direction of the stories is still very indicative of that. The whole thing with the love cleric that they would very much like to believe that folks forgot about, but we remember, would, I believe, would have been significantly less likely to happen if they had a more diverse team, or at the very least that their diverse team would have felt more comfortable speaking up without retribution, and to say that this is powerful problematic, and maybe we don't put that anywhere close to, let's put it closer to the incinerator than we put it to Unearthed Arcana. How's about that for an idea? And I think that that's very indicative, and especially when you have a lot of big name streams and companies that are saying that they are an inclusive and diverse place for gamers, where their inclusivity and diversity team, 9 out of 10 people who are being paid on that team are white. And that makes me feel some kind of way. And I know that a lot of other folks feel similarly. So it's pretty much walking the walk insofar as that, and kind of acknowledging that even, in intersectionality, that even though if folks are part of one marginalized population and there's an issue that's affecting another marginalized population, that fight is your fight too, and kind of proactively seeking after that. Because we've been seeing a lot, especially this month, a lot of silence on promoting Black creators from places that are marginalized, who like understand what that oppression is like. So I think that acknowledging that in one way or another, a lot of us are part of the problem, but that also means that all of us are also part of the solution. And walking that walk instead of using the nomenclature and the language for clout, that is what I would like to see changed.
You said it all perfectly. But I do we want to sit here and talk about the Unearthed Arcana for just a minute? The Love Cleric was an absolute mess, but like maybe we just look beyond that fucking trash fire. Or they renamed it, right? It's like the
Unity domain.
It's still not great. But I am a little in love with the Clockwork Sorcerer. I like the concept of like, I lack all the proper words to describe my feelings towards it.
Could you explain? I can't say that I've actually taken a look at it. Could you give me the gist of what that does?
I haven't looked into the mechanics of it. I truly am a player who gets swept up in like flavor things. So the concept that your sorceress origin comes from some great mechanical being, or like perhaps your like great-great-grandmother was an artificer who created X, Y, or Z, and like that some of that magic has been infused with you, or like you're a warforged, and like just by existing like in that way that you get your magic from this this cool it's just being a cool robot, I think, is what pulled me in now that I'm thinking about it.
I mean, magic robots are a pretty powerful sell, I'm not gonna
Mhm.
lie. So I mean, it's weird because quote, like, flavor, or I guess I would just say narrative elements and mechanical elements, ironically using the word mechanics of the Clockwork Sorcerer,
Mhm.
but they have never struck me, they're always one and the same. And
Mhm.
this is kind of interesting given Dungeon Commander Orion,
Mhm.
they posted an excellent thread about having a multitude of interests going into video game design. And I was thinking about it, and I responded that the concept of people existing who don't have all of their interests like enmeshed in one another and influencing and like referencing all of those different creative endeavors seemed so foreign to me. And
Mhm.
the whole idea of the narrative concept is like, that sounds really freaking rad, I'm not gonna lie.
Mhm.
But then there's kind of that hitch in my mind where when I design something, the process is usually thus, which is, what are my pop culture and mythological touchstones? What does this thing, this option, this class, whatever, what does this feel like to play? And then how do I make it feel that way in terms of mechanics?
Mhm.
So it's like the thing that I always find with Unearthed Arcana a lot of the time, and this kind of makes sense because it's playtest material, is that the concept is there, but say a lot of the flavor, or not, sorry, the narrative does not bear itself out in the mechanics. The
Mhm.
mechanics tend to feel like either they'll overreach in terms of sheer power, or they don't quite fit in terms of maybe what things we're trying to like get across, or what it
Mhm.
enables players to do versus this very specific idea of what a player who plays this character will look like or want. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So I mean, I definitely want to. I'll probably at some point take a look at the Clockwork Sorcerer, but it's interesting because those the narrative and the mechanical are very much one and the same.
Mhm.
And ideally, one reinforces another.
Yeah, I totally get it. I just with Unearthed Arcana stuff and like subclasses, things in general, like I don't like to look at the mechanics. I usually I want to play it, and then I'll figure out in that moment whether or not like you were saying, like if things need to be fixed to make it feel more that way. So just I usually just look at the titles of things and get like
Mm,
super excited of like what this could be and what this could mean, and like how did they do it and how can it be better.
mhm.
um just absolutely love it. But if you haven't looked, did you look at the second most recent jump for the Unearthed Arcana stuff? I'm trying to think. If not, we can just move past this because I'm trying to
I
remember what it
can't
was.
I can't say that I have. Yeah,
Uh,
I honestly, it's one of those things where
mm,
I if I look too much at what Wizards of the Coast is doing, I'm not
mhm,
looking enough at what I'm doing.
mhm,
And so it's like I'm trying to get away from the dynamic of being influenced by people who are at the top of the industry just because they're at the top of the industry.
mhm,
And like, that's not to say that folks who really enjoy Unearthed Arcana, who make their own stuff, are like that. I just know that personally, I will get caught into the undertow of like, yeah, but Jeremy Crawford did it like this. Should I really be doing it like that? And
mm,
it's like, the I'm sure that Jeremy Crawford is an absolutely lovely man, and he is an excellent rules designer and grammatician.
mhm,
But the part of me that's just kind of like, well, is Jeremy Crawford designing your thing? well, no, I'm designing your thing. Then fuck Jeremy Crawford. Then you do your own thing, and like, don't worry about what it is. And if the players like it, then that's the goal. So it's almost kind of that sort of thing of keep your eyes on your own paper, which, you know, as someone with ADHD is very hard to do.
Yeah. Totally. So let's saunter over to our next question. Arcade Fox asked, what's your favorite type of encounters to both set up as a DM and then to also encounter as a player?
Let's see. I almost feel like I have to skip past the player version because I've played so few games as a player. But insofar as stuff that I like setting up, I have in the past, in terms of stuff I have the most experience with, if I have a combat encounter, I very much like incorporating the environment in some way. Like, for instance, it is very rare that I have an open battlefield and just, you know, you have a sack of hit points on this side and several sacks of hit points on the other side, and they hit each other. What is it? What's it called? I'm going to totally date myself if I could actually remember what the freaking thing was called. It's not EverQuest. That's a fictional game. RuneScape style. Like, you just kind of like, yeah, I know, right? Just kind of when you stand in front of each other and just kind of hit each other like this. And I think that's boring as shit. Why would I want to play that? I could go and play any other, like, you know, video game with grid combat that does that if I wanted to do that. So I'm like, all right, this combat is going to be you traversing the side of a cliff, and then a Behir crawls down from the cliff. And while you might be able to handle a Behir fairly easily, given your level and capabilities, you handling a Behir while you're on the side of the equivalent of, I forget what the name of the mountain is above the mines of Moria, but like that whole scene from like Fellowship of the Ring where you're like trying to climb up and you're dealing with snow and sleet and shit. So like when you fight a monster in my game, it will be like maybe not an especially powerful monster, but you'll be on the side of a mountain when it's sleet storming and with the risk of plummeting to your death. And it's a lot more of a thing of like, all right, well, let me think about my surroundings. And once again, going back to our wizard question, ways in which players can engage with the world around them in creative ways. And the interesting thing with that is I also find that depending on if you set it up well and they make really kind of cool choices, is that those encounters tend to lend themselves to players developing their characters through play in interesting ways. Because I mean, you know, you're, you know, Jackaboy the fighter hits a thing a bunch of times and kills it. Cool. What do we know about Jackaboy from that? He's a fighter. Great. But if you're fighting a Behir crawling down from a thing on the side of a cliff, and kind of you're like, all right, well, I could do this, but there's also this sort of you know, a little bit of sleet that looks like it's ready to break off if I hit it with something, and you manage to throw a dagger at it when this like clutch move when one of your teammates is down, and instead of killing the Behir just by, you know, stabbing it repeatedly in stabbable areas, you knock it off of the mountain and it plummets to its doom, or you manage to like collapse the ice so that like you and your fellows can escape. Then you learn something about Jackaboy, the human fighter, from that, which is that, you know, maybe they're not especially bloodthirsty. They can recognize when they're beat. They care more about their teammates than necessarily just hitting the thing. And just, yeah, so integrating environments in a way that enables players to better develop cool characters or express values about their characters that we've learned through choice in meaningful ways. So yeah, that's kind of the thing I'd like to do. Now, in terms of things that I would like to do in the future that I haven't gotten a chance to do, heists. I really want to do a cool infiltration and heist. Speaking of pillars that 5e doesn't especially do well, it's that. Now, there are ways that you can kind of like squish and mold it. Like Brendan Lee Mulligan,
Yeah.
whom I absolutely adore, managed to do this with Tiny Heist.
Mhm.
But the amount of things that you had to kind of like hurdles that you had to overcome so that you had to fight the system in order to make that happen. It had to be a party of almost entirely rogues and bards. There had to be a whole bunch of different like skill mechanics and things ported over from other games, which I mean, if that's fun, that's fun. But like that's a person who gets paid to do that, who has a design team and like a
Mhm.
regular schedule to be able to do that. I could do that, or I could play Blades in the Dark or Scum and Villainy, which is built around precisely that sort of maneuvering. So this whole idea of just kind of sleuthing in and doing a teamwork type thing, where you have to coordinate and everything, is something that I've really wanted to do. To that end, one thing, if I ever get ambitious enough to run a con game, what like a convention game,
Mhm.
what I'd want to do is have like three or four tables depending on how wild I'm feeling that day, and a bunch of different GMs who are coordinating with one another, about like, okay, you're the team who's going to do this, you're the team who's going to do this, you're the team who's going to do this, and basically how the infiltration or heist or thing goes depends on how well each table is coordinating their thing. But the tables
Mhm.
will be separate from one another, so they don't know how fucked they are until the GMs kind of have their mid-session meeting and go, "Oh, by the way, you're fucked." Like,
Mhm.
and then they have to puzzle their way out. But I very much like that sort of when plans go awry sort of manner to it, but then also rewarding cleverness. So yeah, heists are definitely something that I've wanted to do for a while.
I absolutely agree. The first game that I ever DM'd, I DM'd two separate games at the same time, and they were gonna interact with each other. We did not get that far in, but I had a group of treasure hunters who were basically doing heist, and I had to figure out how to do that all on my lonesome for my first attempt at doing this. And then a set of detectives who were gonna like piece together what happened and who stole it and like all of this garbage. But it it was very fun, but it was too much work for just me to do like every 2 weeks to figure out how I'm gonna make any of this work and like what did the clues look like and all of that. Um, Definitely was a lot of fun to attempt to set up in the moment. But one of my favorite kind of combat scenarios to run players through is uh, battles that have like time constraints or like something happens every 2 rounds or something, like
Mm.
things change. It's very good because it stresses them out and there's usually really good consequences in those scenarios. um,
There's actually, kind of speaking of that, I 100% agree. I absolutely love that sort of the ticking clock, which
mhm,
for GMs who are just starting to broaden out from 5e like I am, read Blades in the Dark. There are so many really great ideas, one of which are progress clocks. And so basically it's like you draw a pie chart, not a pie chart, just a pie, like a
mhm,
circle with a bunch of lines through it.
mhm,
And this represents a certain amount of time or time passing. You can have easier tasks that have more slices in it, so they take longer to do, or
mhm,
more chances to mess up. Or you can have ones that are simpler, and you can just kind of like recognize those things. And rather than say a measurement of time that is bounded to a real world measurement, because one of the things that you'll find in D&D is a lot of players will get caught up in analysis paralysis, and I don't want to punish someone for that, but I do want to move the game along. So progress clocks are a way that are very useful for hitting that nice in between point, because if you have a progress clock that's like, okay, let's label the progress clock, the team infiltrates this secured location, and each time they succeed on it, you color in a piece of that pie, and it helps them go and see in a tangible way how close they are to succeeding at their objective. Now, once they fail a roll, you go, okay, interesting. And then you draw a progress clock on the table and you fill in one pie thing and you don't tell them what that progress clock is for. And they go, something else is happening that we don't know about. And it's kind of a fun way to add that tension, but without having a literal like hourglass on the table and seeing that the more time that they're thinking, they're watching it like run out, and then all of a sudden, boop, you lose because everyone hated that timed element in video games. That sucked in terms of that. But in terms of that tension that you mentioned, I did want to reference a construct that I find very useful in my games, because as careful as I want to be, because especially in terms of anxiety triggers and stuff, I do use tension and anxiety and dread as narrative devices. And the thing that I like to picture in my head is, you know, those steam, like the pressure valves, like where you can see the needle kind of going, it's like one of those, but it's labeled "we're fucked." And like, you know, where you want that needle is in the yellow. You don't want it to go to the red, because once it goes to the red, players feel helpless and they give up. You don't want it to be in the green, because then there's no stakes and nobody cares about what's going on, whatever, we're going to succeed anyways. But in the yellow is the like, I don't know how to deal with this. I don't know if we have the tools to be able to do it, but I feel competent enough in my abilities that I can try new ideas and propose things, and I'm not going to immediately save or die if I'm wrong. And you give them freedom to experiment in terms of that. So kind of just when I look around the table and I'm creating that tension in the way that you're describing, I think of where that needle is, and if it's getting a little bit too high, I can offer a player a free skill check that is relevant to their advantage for them to maybe glean a little bit of knowledge without having to sacrifice their action on their turn to do it, for instance. I can ease off that pressure valve a little bit, story moves on. So yeah, that just kind of triggered that memory in my head. But I hope that those of you at home who are watching or listening find that useful. So
I definitely found that super useful, and I'm probably going to try to do that tomorrow, because I'm DMing 2 games back to back and I'm very excited. But like another thing that I've just started doing at my table, not frequently, is just like every now and then, like I'll pass a player a note and usually it's like if they are specifically doing a perception check, I'll put like what they see on that note, because not everyone is looking. And so like they can choose whether or not to share that information with their party members or not. But sometimes it just says, "This is a note, look shocked," like, and then pass it back. I saw it, like, I think it was on Twitter that I saw like the suggestion to do things like that, and it's so good. It causes so many good moments where like the other players are like, "What?" and they're just like, "No, it's cool, and it's like, "No, it's not cool," and it's a great way to get them a little nervous before like getting further in the dungeon or wherever they are, the sewers, because that's usually where my players are hanging out.
I think that it's kind of interesting, because as you describe that, I'm picturing in my head of kind of I find that a lot of the challenges narratively that GMs will have to contend with is getting past those sticking points. Because say if you read a book, the stuff progresses as the stuff progresses, but at the table, at least if you are engaging your players in a way where they feel like they move the story along, sometimes those things that get the ball rolling, so to speak, they're not entirely sure what to do. And kind of sometimes that getting past that sticking point and getting the ball rolling again is giving them a piece of information. But then also the thing that I think is very true that you've brought up is sometimes it's not even the information, but players don't know how to feel, because they'll just kind of be in that thing of like, well, we kind of have this thing, but my character would kind of feel like that, but they're also aware of this other player. And once again, it's that cognitive gridlock of what's going on. So if you can get the entire table feeling a certain way, then you can enable motivation to start going in a direction. And a lot of the time, that's about all you really need. Is you just need that initial push, and then they will do everything else. But kind of giving them that efficacy or inspiration or motivation or whatever you want to call it is a thing that I think doesn't get enough attention in terms of the GM's toolbox. And I think that you brought up an excellent point in terms of that.
Thank you. And so well said. I feel like all of our guests here on Hero Sheets are just so well articulated, and sometimes I just feel like I stumble over my words. And so like you explain the ideas that I want to convey really well.
This is also an excellent place to say, remember to take your meds, kids, because this diatribe has been brought to you by Concerta.
Let's hop over to our next question, which I think is kind of related. It's again from Nova, from our lovely Nova in our Discord. She asked, "What's your what is the coolest / most emotional tabletop RPG moment that you have ever had?"
Oh, that's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
It's always ones that are delivered to me via my players. There are two that I can think of off the bat, which was that the first time in Out of the Abyss, and this is interesting because it kind of was enabled by the fact that we had half the party missing that week. So basically, the end point of this, spoilers for people who haven't played Out of the Abyss and don't want it spoiled for you. The end point of this was basically a showdown with Dweeblex, the demon lord of oozes. The players at the time are level 14, level 13. And basically, they need to make it to the Myconid home place. It's not Neverlight Grove, it's somewhere else. But basically, I had this whole thing of, okay, I've only got 3 of my 7 players this week, so I've got a number of these encounters and obstacles along the way that I've planned. And then one of my players, whose character died recently, prepared a druid, and she goes, I have transport via plants. And I'm like, all right. So you get there, and I'm in my head like, shit. They're there way too soon. And they dealt with the problems like that were there in record time. And then I was like, cool. Here's the encounter with Dweeblex, Demon Lord of Slime, with 3 level 13 characters. And I'm watching the clock like tick down to the end of our session, and I'm like, all right, so if I can get them to survive like a round of combat, then I can maybe figure a way to finagle this into a cliffhanger. So one of my players is wielding Dawnbringer, which, unbeknownst to him at the time, I have turned into a vestige, so an evolving weapon that becomes more powerful based off of a player's narrative choices and progression through the campaign. That is, as far as I know, it might have been someone else, but I primarily learned about it through Matthew Mercer with Critical Role. And so he is wielding Dawnbringer, which is basically a radiant lightsaber. His character is very practical about surviving, is good, but one would not necessarily say selfless. And so he is facing down Dweeblex, Demon Lord of Slime, a buffed version, because challenge rating is a whole other discussion. But basically, he is sitting there. He has taken a few good hits, and Dawnbringer, who is sentient, is saying like, "All right, so what do we do? Are we staying? Are we going?" And he's like, "No, we're standing here. We're fighting." And he just kind of like holds it, and basically the blade. And I'm like, "Cool." The blade lengthens about 6 inches and just blazes into radiance. And basically, and then I handed him his new card that was like Dawnbringer Exalted, and basically it now deals damage like a great axe, but it's a long sword, and just kind of that sort of thing of like bathing the whole area in radiance, and like Dweeblex like looking aghast and kind of reeling back. was a really cool moment that was both driven by the player, and it was a really cool cliffhanger for us to lead into the final battle, which actually had the second of our two moments, which was the same druid who got them there got the final blow on Dweeblex via Call Lightning, but she's an Azamar, so she had whatever the Azamar ability is that gives you the wings, and she got KO'd, but she got healing worded by someone else. And I thought for a moment that basically that it went out when you go unconscious. Fun fact, it does not go out when you go unconscious. It just says it lasts for a minute. So she wakes back up, and this version of Dweeblex, I've basically made it so that his there, I guess, because Dweeblex is an ooze and gendered. That's a whole conversation. But basically, that their regeneration only ceases when you hit them with radiant damage. And she was the only one who was able to do radiant damage, and only because of her Azamar form. So they were edging quickly towards TPK when she went unconscious. Someone healing words her, and she looks up in the book, is like, oh no, I still have my wings. Which, fun fact, you get to do radiant damage equal to your level once per turn when you hit a creature with a spell or attack. So Dweeblex is looming over one of her friends. Another one of them is unconscious and slowly being drawn into Dweeblex's form, and she basically just reaches out and gives this fucking orbital laser of like radiant call lightning into Dweeblex and just causes him to explode. The third and final one is actually one of these like very kind of quiet moments that I didn't know was a moment until it came out. But basically, we had one of my players who is currently on hiatus from my Prince of the Apocalypse campaign played a Tortle Paladin who is an Oath of Redemption. So his name is Wandering Watts. He's a pacifist. And he follows Eldath, who is an elven water goddess of redemption and healing. But for a while, especially when he got this dwarven thrower, he was starting to be pretty violent because he was a paladin class, and that's what paladins are able to do. They smite stuff real hard. And then he experienced what was basically a near TPK, where a couple of his friends got killed, and he got taken prisoner and basically forced to forge things for an earth cult. When he got out of that mine during their downtime, my player asked me, can I just like find some rocks and just like get just some kind of like carving tools, like whittling? And I'm like, okay, sure, why not? And he's just like, all right, well, I'm just gonna work on that. And how long is it going to take me to do that? I'm like, okay, a few days. Because this is a thing that you're devoting yourself to do, is like, I'm not going to make you make a check because his dex was garbage. But like an 8. Tortles, very rarely a Dexy class. But basically, he noted, because he also made that decision when he came back out of that mine and was rescued by the current party. He made the decision to multi-class into Life Cleric. And what he revealed to me was that the things that he was carving in stone were small effigies of every person he failed to save. And he keeps them on a necklace around his neck. And it's basically a version of his holy symbol, because it reminds him of what happens when you take the path of violence and more people get hurt than you save. And it just blew my mind that he was just like, yeah, no, this is this long thing that like Watts is just going to work on. And this is just like a really cool choice that he made. And I was just like that. I was speechless. It was amazing.
Oh, I absolutely love that. Like when players just come to the table and like make really strong choices, and like when they experience like like life-changing things for their character, and they literally do change like how that character is played and how they interact with the world is really, really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's my favorite kind of stuff.
Yeah, I've been very blessed with some very good players in my games. So it's one of those things where like I feel like I have succeeded as a GM when I enable them to make those choices. Absolutely, I want things that I bring to the table to be evocative, but ultimately that's my guiding star is, are the smiles there, are people having a good time, and do players feel empowered at my table to make decisions that are strong and powerful and move the story in ways that I could never have anticipated. Do they trust that me as the GM will respect and try to foster and encourage their ability to make those choices and have the confidence that they'll be respected and further collaborated with to create a greater whole? Yeah, and I'm very much rewarded for it. So
Truly. Okay, this is going to be our last question, and it is literally moving in the exact opposite direction of this lovely answer that you've given. It's from Leather Jacket Bear from our Discord, and they asked, when is the most ashamed you've ever been of one of your players' decision-making skills?
ashamed is the wrong word.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have had one or two like problematic players who made the game less enjoyable for those at the table, but I don't. It's one of those things that like those ones I almost feel like it's better not for me to talk about, because it's like the best thing that I can do is to go, there's an unhealthy element at the table, so I'm going to try to address it, and if it isn't resolved, then unfortunately maybe ask that person that another table would be better suited to them. And I've luckily only had to do that twice, but it's one of those things where like recounting the experience feels like it would cause more negative aspects than positive. And insofar as when players make decisions that end up being mistakes, I don't even necessarily want to say, I don't want to say I enjoy it, because it seems like I take delight in their misery. But
No, but
oh, sorry, please go ahead.
No, like I get what you mean though, because I absolutely love when my players make mistakes, because it makes their character feel more real, that they have flaws and that they do things wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. The only one that I could think of that was like so in that kind of like Mr. Magoo Three Stooges like type of direction was that can you hear? Okay, my video for you is frozen. Okay, cool, we're back. Whoo! All right.
Okay.
Hag, don't you come in my house with that evil. All right. So one of my players currently in Prince of the Apocalypse, or his previous character, was the party was taken prisoner by an ancient green dragon. A number of them had found ways of making themselves appear useful to her, and she had assigned them in various different ways. His sorcerer was basically someone who was just kind of like, he was in jail, he was just in a cell, and he's like, all right, can I find, and he just basically rolled really well and managed to scavenge the components for a charm person spell. And so he managed to do a bunch of rolls of like charming the guards and convincing them to like lock themselves up, and rolling stealth and hiding underneath cots in like a couple of the cells. And it was a good 15-20 minutes of him continuously making these decisions and then rolling really well, that he manages to get out of the prison, like the dungeon wing or area of her lair, and is thus far undetected. He then makes the decision to go to the proper, like the lair proper, like the room proper of this dragon, and goes, hey, listen, I escaped your prison. Clearly, I'm pretty magically talented, right? I should be like really useful to you. And unfortunately, managed to roll really poorly a couple of times. And then also, this dragon is one who, for a little backstory, her magical powers are underdeveloped for a dragon of her age, and it's a place of great frustration and anger for her. And he, being a sorcerer, says, oh, you don't know how to learn magic. Well, maybe learning magic isn't your thing. I'm a sorcerer, my magic's in my blood. So he manages to escape, to kill one of the guards and charm a bunch of them into imprisoning themselves. And he goes, hey, I can turn your guards against you, and I escaped your jail. Oh, magic's in my blood, and that's how I was able to do that. And she's like, oh, interesting, and eats him. And it was just kind of one of those things where I'm just kind of like, I'm giving him the DM look of like, all right, so just so you're aware, this is the situation. And he's like, yeah, no, okay, I will absolutely, like, that seems legit, I'm gonna do that. And it's like, he's like, the exit door is for those of you who are blind, the exit door is in one direction, and a wood chipper is directly next to the exit door. And he goes, huh, interesting, and dives himself into the wood chipper. And like, that is how Bardon, the divine soul sorcerer, died. And it was just, and the player was an excellent sport about it, and immediately, like, the next session rolled a character who is a hobgoblin fighter, who we flavored as the chef of the hobgoblins who serve this dragon. He now has expertise in finding natural herbs, because that was funny. But it was a great experience of the table watching this player make these decisions and just going like, no, what do you do? Oh baby, what is you doing? Like, oh my god. So yeah, that was one of those times. But even then, it was like it was a great story, and everyone was laughing at the end of it. And that's ultimately what that's what the goal is, right?
It truly is. I believe that we're at time.
Okay.
I should keep better track of that. I should know how long my show is supposed to be, but I believe that we are at the end of this cool episode of Hero Sheets. I know that we just got rated, and so all these lovely viewers got to come in for that last bit of your story before.
Oh no!
Before.
On, let's do it. Let's run. I can do it. Let's.
Oh, we got 7 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I've got one.
Do you want me to hear me go off on warlocks, or do you have?
Oh yeah, wait, let's talk about warlocks. I completely forgot.
Okay. All right. Cool. So, warlocks in 5e. I put up a huge poll, not a huge poll, it was a poll with like 3 options. Anyways, like about a month ago, talking about what players really enjoyed about warlocks. And the overwhelming majority seemed to be that they offered very satisfying role play options in terms of dynamics with patrons, how that dynamic could evolve, and all of that sort of thing. A few of them talked about how they were useful for kind of like dipping or multi-classing into different things, but that kind of reinforced my feelings of dissatisfaction with the warlock mechanically as a class in 5e. Namely, that it is a class that is supposed to be a spellcaster, but that has an action economy like a martial class. You've seen all of the Eldritch Blast memes, right? So essentially, what does a fighter do every round? They will usually use their action to attack, maybe use their bonus action to second. If you look at a caster, their action is usually to cast a spell of some kind. or as a bonus action, but usually they're casting kind of a different spell per round, and they can dip into their toolbox to mess around with that in some way. What's the Warlock's thing that they're doing every round? Most likely.
Just an Eldritch Blast, unless you're me, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, and you can occasionally do spells. So what you have is a spellcaster, or at least a class that is billed as a spellcaster, that has a toolkit that's closer to a half caster, or even a quarter caster, like the Arcane Trickster or the Eldritch Knight. But there is only a few permutations in which you can make a warlock that keeps up with the capabilities of other classes, save for options that are presented to you by homebrew or through multi-classing with other classes, which multi-classing is an optional rule, and it is there for, if you feel like, you would get more satisfaction out of kind of having these different things. But the fact that it's an optional rule, but it is not explicitly, but it's kind of implicitly acknowledged that it's mandatory to do with most warlock builds, seems to point to me in the direction that there is a deficiency that's not being currently addressed with the way that it's currently talking about. Because, like, for instance, talking about spells, for instance, you cap out with your spell slots at 3 per short rest, I believe, and they're 5th level spell slots. Now, there's a very specific type of DM who likes to run a game that is mostly one big encounter per long rest. Cool, that works totally fine. Once you get into tier 3, so level 11 to 15-ish, you can have multiple things happen per day. Fights can kind of drag on, and a lot of the times you kind of have to scale it in that direction to contend with some of the things that parties are able to do. Clerics, like being able to heal and bring the party back up and everything. Just the abundance of resources that everyone has at their disposal tends to kind of, I don't want to say demand, but incline you to have to continue to amp up what you throw at them, and not only what you throw at them, but the amount that you throw at them. The warlock, because it is sort of like a short rest sort of thing, has the propensity to put a player in a position where they're going, I have this whole number of options of spells that I know, but I get 3 of them. Am I going to need this utility spell later on that doesn't actually benefit from being at a 5th level slot? Or am I going to do this, I'm going to hit my oh shit button, because I get to hit my oh shit button 3 times per short rest. But that's about it. And it kind of doesn't scale in that same way. The second part is that a lot of people enjoy, myself included, the modularity that the Warlock class has in terms of the Eldritch Invocations. However, it is one of the very few classes in D&D 5e that it is possible to build wrong. And by build wrong, I don't mean build suboptimally. I mean, it doesn't function. As an example, you can pick a Hexblade patron and not take Pact of the Blade. And or you could, you take Eldritch, it's possible to be a Warlock and not learn Eldritch Blast. Because it's not presented to you that this is the Warlock thing. It's just one of your spells on your spell list. And if you're a new player kind of looking at that, it's like, all right, well, but I thought these other cantrips might be more useful, right? So it's one of those things where it's possible to make choices if you are inexperienced with the class or don't have someone who is kind of guiding you along, so that you make a character that is frustrating and not satisfying to play, just because your stuff doesn't line up. Like when it's Eldritch Invocations, it's usually you take Agonizing Blast because you get your charisma modifier to that, but it's possible to not take that. And all of those sorts of things is if something is so essential that your capacity as a player playing this class is significantly diminished, if you don't take it, then why give the player the option to do something that is almost guaranteed to be unsatisfying? You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where, for instance, I don't think that the warlock is unsalvageable, and I don't want to come across as if I'm being a hater to the people who are putting it together. However, I would do things like, for instance, Eldritch Blast is no longer a spell. Eldritch Blast is a class feature that you get at level 1 when you become a warlock, and it is a sign of your connection of the raw magic that is channeled through you from your patron. It then takes one of 3 forms in the form of Eldritch Invocations. You can form the Eldritch Blast into a blade and then make a number of attacks as an action equal to the number of Eldritch Blasts that you are able to create. So that way it scales at levels 5, 11, 17, as usual. Or, you can do things like, push an enemy back or that sort of thing. But basically, the fact that the class's core combat competency is optional is something that I think is not especially strong about it. And so, just to kind of like wrap up, it's not as though I think that it's bad or that there aren't positive things about it. As my poll indicated, a lot of people feel positively. However, there is a strong tradition in most of the classes in 5e to where it is hard to mess this up in a way that you will not have fun. But with the warlock, that consistency is not as encouraged or enabled or empowered as much by the way that it's designed. So yeah, if there was anything that I was going to do, it would basically be better creating the class in a way that enables the players to have that customizability, but also funnels them in a direction that improves the percentage chances of them creating a character that is fun and empowering and badass. So,
well said. Now we can wrap up the show, as it is 7:32 my time, and I'm guessing 9:32-ish your time. That was our episode of Hero Sheets. Again, I am your lovely host, Adora, and you can catch me on Twitter at ethnic_Dorito, where I tweet about being tired all the time. Vince, you want to talk about where we can find you and what you do again?
So you can find me at Dichotomous Prime on Twitter, where you will hear me talking about social justice related things, tabletop design, storytelling, voice acting, and all that sort of stuff. As well, you can find me contributing as an editor and sensitivity reader on Unconquered, which is an all POC tabletop role-playing game, bronze punk fantasy, that is currently on Kickstarter. If you're looking to support Black creators, the head of it, my good friend Nick Masick, is awesome. He's been working on this for a while, and he's an awesome creator. Aside from that, other people you should absolutely support. You should hit up Swordsfall if you're not already on Twitter. Amazing Afropunk fantasy. Amazing art drops every single day. Lore out your ears. It's amazing. Rap bards. I mean, come on. Why would you not love that? And also Miss Twisted on Twitch, doing the charity things, doing the try hard things. She's hilarious. She's wise as fuck. And she is just an absolute delight. So absolutely follow those creators as well as myself. And that's about it for me.
Okay, don't forget to follow H Without Limits on Twitter and join our Discord server if you haven't already, because it's a really great place to chat and have very similar discussions with like-minded people. Also want to just thank the lovely Samwise for producing today's episode. We didn't have any tech hags, which is really, really cool. And then if you guys want to stay and chat for a minute, we are going to go raid the lovely folks at the Chromatic Chimera. I said it wrong a lot. And I believe they're streaming their first episode of a new show on their channel, right, Sam? Yep. So definitely you guys should tune into that. But that's all. Safe travels, everyone.
Bye-bye.